I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening to the webinar. I know here in Cheshire the weather's a bit wild, and I suspect we're in for a day or two of weather of this type, but I'm hoping that we'll all stay connected and we can be gleaned with some interesting information this evening. Now, as you all know, we're here tonight as the subject matter is negotiating dairy contracts. I think it's fair to say, as a dairy farmer myself, it would arguably be the most important contract that I or my family have within the farming setup that we have. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Holstein UK for organising the event here this evening. I understand that the young breeders are invited to join us, which I think is so important. I remember when I was a young breeder, and you know, I look back now and I look back to what my focus was when I was breeding what I thought was the ideal cow. And I think evenings like this, had they been available at the time, would probably have helped to shape my thoughts and my direction of travel and the type of cow that perhaps that we bred or breed to suit the market, which is so very important. So my job as chairman tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is I will ask the panel to introduce themselves in a second. There will be a question and answer session, which is open to you all. And I'd like you all to feel free to fire away with questions, which I understand will be coming through the Q&A section. I will ask the question to the panel members, if that's okay. And the idea being that we will keep the questions anonymous. So please feel free, everybody, to get stuck in, so to speak. And then at the very end, ladies and gentlemen, I will do a little summary just to round up what's gone on here this evening. So what I'd like to do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and in the true good-natured form, I'd like to ask Abby to introduce herself and what she's about and how she's involved in our industry, and what she might be able to bring to the party here tonight. So, thank you, Abby.
Great, thanks very much, Ian. Yeah, so I'm Abby Reader. I'm a dairy farmer from just outside Cardiff, so we're quite an urban farm, and we're milking approximately 200 cows. Well, we should be milking about 200 cows. We're currently milking about 170 because we've got bovine TB. My herd is split between two breeds, so we've got pedigree Holstein Friesian and we have pedigree dairy Shorthorn. And it was quite interesting, Ian, saying how different choices can influence what sort of breed or how you run your herd, and certainly for the dairy Shorthorn, I'm very much influenced by family history, and they're all descended from a grandfather, and it's a breed that we very much enjoy keeping in the herd, but comes with all sorts of ties with it. I have a retailer aligned contract with Supermarket. We have been on that for the last 13 years now. That has had lots of ups and downs. It brings a lot of challenges with it. I think sometimes it's quite easy as a farmer to look at the milk prices on the, you know, in the Farmers Weekly, the Farmers Guardian, and think, oh, if you've got a retailer aligned contract, you're sailing. And to a degree, you know, it does offer a certain amount of security, but it definitely comes with a number of conditions which can add a lot to the price of the milk that we produce, and it can require all sorts of other commitments that, you know, maybe you won't have, if you haven't been exposed to that type of contract before, you may not have heard of. So happy to expand a little bit more on that. In terms of my background with the dairy industry, so other than managing the dairy cows, I am the NFU Cymru Dairy Board Chair, which I have been for the last 2 years. I've just been voted back in now for another term. I very much get involved in a lot of NFU issues. I seem to have a particular affinity with dealing with the vegan debate. It's something that very much rattles me, and I take quite a lot of pleasure in answering a lot of those questions going forward. I'm also getting quite interested in the net zero debate, which I guess is really linked to veganism as well. In terms of what I'm interested in at the moment, I'm doing a lot with bovine TB. It's impacting my herd, it's impacting the industry across Wales and across GB. And that is quite an important area of research to me. And we're also doing a carbon footprinting project on the farm, which is involving some agroforestry. I'm getting ready to plant 14,000 trees in 1.5 hectares, which will be quite an interesting experiment. Growing some different crops to bring in a different source of income regularly, because usually when you think about trees, you tend to think that the income from them is coming in maybe in 10 or 20 years time, whereas I'm looking at a turnover of 2 to 3 years every year for, you know, the next 10 or 20 years. So I'm quite interested in that and quite excited. So I don't know how much you want me to go on for, Ian, so that's just a little bit of a background about me.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. Thank you, Abby. Could I now ask James, please, if you could introduce yourself, James, please?
Yeah, evening, everyone. James Osman, I'm Chief Dairy Advisor at the NFU. So I look after everything to do with dairy policy, which is an exciting world, as you can imagine. So I do work closely with Abby, who sits on our dairy board as well. Our job at the NFU in the dairy world is obviously supporting our dairy farmer members. So the ones that ring us up and in need of help, we do everything we can to do that, and that ranges massively from some of the bits Abby's outlined, all the way through to business support on farm. Contracts is a massive part of what we do. That varies quite a lot, because it could be an individual contract issue or a legal dispute that one of our members has, and they'll ring us up wanting help to say, you know, how can I get out of a contract, or I've been told I've done something wrong, and, you know, can you help me argue and things like that. And then all the way through to sort of representing members with all the major processes, and Michael and I have long been chatting about farmer relations, because I think it's a crucial part of what we do as an industry. So yeah, that's very much our role within the NFU is looking at that side of things. We also have been working on some policy stuff to try and change the way that dairy contracts operate. And you might have seen some of this in the farming press, but we're hoping very soon we'll get some new legislation which kind of outlines new fair dealings and ways of working for dairy contracts, which we can perhaps talk a bit more about later. But that's also been a big focus. But I'll leave it there, Ian, for now.
Okay, very good. Thank you, James. And finally, certainly not least, Michael Masters, please.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everybody. Michael Masters. I'm online from deepest, darkest Somerset. I look after the 155 farmers that supply their milk to Barbers Cheesemakers. All our farms are within 30 miles of our 2 creameries. We've got a creamery here in central Somerset near Shepton Mallet, and we have another smaller creamery down near Bridport in Dorset. We're a very unusual dairy processor in the fact that the Barber family themselves own 3,000 cows of their own. So I work with a processor that completely understands farming and farmers as part of the family of farmers themselves. So that makes quite a unique distinction. We don't have any big household brands. Indeed, about only 26% of all the cheeses that we make would go into a UK retail. We would sell far more of our cheeses to the export market and to the manufacturing ingredients sector, specialist edition sectors, to sell to as many different customers as possible and in as many sectors as possible. We're not just a cheese maker making cheddar cheese either. We make double Gloucester, red Leicester. We are surprised, it may surprise a lot of your listeners, we're the biggest maker of Wensleydale cheese in the UK, which you probably wouldn't expect, south of the M4. Not only that, we process our own whey here as well for the infant formula market, and the bulk of that will end up in Asia to feed babies across Asia. In addition, we produce butter and obviously a huge amount of cream as well. So I've been involved with Barbers now for 5 years. We've developed a Barbers Assured voluntary control contract that's compliant with the voluntary code that came out in 2012. In my former life, before I came to Barbers, I used to look after DCD. Dairy Crest Direct was one of the first producer organisations, set up the first DPO back in 2013. I was also involved in the second DPO that was started when Direct Milk, that looked after the remaining Dairy Crest farmers that went into Muller. So I do have quite a bit of experience of either side of a contract. So one key message that everybody's talked about already, and that's about relationships and communications. I firmly believe that it's incumbent on every processor should at least correspond with their farmers at least once a month. So there should never be any big surprises when prices go up or prices go down. So part of the mantra of what we're about, as well as having a voluntary controlled compliant contract, we also have a B price mechanism within our contract. And that is priced non-discretionary by AMP -2. So those farmers this month in November that produce more milk over and above their base milk volume will be receiving north of 40p for those extra litres. So it's completely transparent and completely market related. I'm sure we'll have lots to chat about later in. There you go.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all of our panelists. That was a very good summary of what you're all about. I'm sure it'll be very interesting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we'd like to do is get the ball rolling with one or two nice, relatively straightforward questions. And I'd like to make a little bit of a start here. And my question is to all of the panelists, really. So the question is, as a milk producer myself, looking at my contract, I feel the biggest risks to my business are the length of payment terms and the price per litre. Now, I understand that the price per litre is a whole debate in itself, it's a whole evening in itself, and arguably, perhaps we haven't got the time for that here this evening when we consider all the implications that surround such an interesting subject. But what I would like the panel to comment on is the payment terms, and in particular the duration of payment terms, as I understand that this may be very varied across the industry. And I just wonder whether we as an industry perhaps have got an area here that we maybe need to do a little bit of work on. But it's not really for me to prejudge this, ladies and gentlemen. It's here for the panel to tell us what their thoughts are. And Abby, I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to make start, if that's okay, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. Okay, well, I'm very much going to give the farmer's perspective. I mean, certainly milk price is always going to be the main dictator of any choice, really, that you're going to make on a contract. But there are so many other things that come into it that really I have learnt either the hard way myself as a farmer, or by seeing issues that have cropped up with NFU members over the past few years. So if I look at my own contract and the payment terms there, you're obviously going to be dictated by the quality of the milk that you're selling. So you can have your headline price, but if you don't reach the standards that you're supposed to be supplying, then you are going to incur penalties. Likewise, there's an opportunity to chase bonuses. So it's really important that you're aware of the different areas of that contract, and it's surprising how many people don't quite grasp where these different levels sit. So, you know, if you're looking at contract, make sure you look at that, because they can sting you at some point. Maybe not when you start off on a contract, but as time goes by, it's something to be very much aware of. In terms of issues of being a retailer aligned contract, then, I mean, we have all sorts of health and efficiency standards that we have to meet. All of those will be part of a contract that we will hold with the supermarket that we're supplying. And again, those things can bring in costs. So I'm thinking of things like you have to do mobility scoring every quarter. You know, that's going to cost you probably £200 minimum every time you do it, because you've got to get a vet out on farm. That's 50 quid to get them on farm. It's £100 an hour. They've got to do every single animal. Those things add up. We have to have cow brushes for every 60 cows, depending on what brush you're going to get. Maybe you'll get a nice basic simple one, or maybe you'll like a rotary brush. So you could be looking at £3,000 a brush before you know it. These are all sorts of things that you have to pay for, they have to factor in. So if you've got your milk price at the top, it may be irrelevant if you've got all these other little bits and pieces that you've got to add on underneath. and these payment terms are all going to come into that. I was unfortunately a Tomlinson's farmer, so I was supplying a processor that crashed and went bankrupt, and they left owing us 6 weeks worth of milk. I was trying to remember quite when that is going to end, but I'm still paying that back now. It's going to take me 3 years to pay that off. When you are coupled with bovine TB, or you've got issues we've got MVZs potentially coming in Wales, we've got the farming rules for water in England, all of these things can add up and snowball and can very quickly start to cause you a lot of trouble. So again, you can have that milk price, but what is going on underneath? What are the different requirements that you've got? I was interested to hear from someone who was supplying a different supermarket to myself the other day, and they've got some regulations regarding Yonis testing. And if you have got a cow who is a J5, a high risk Yonis, then you've got 2 weeks to get rid of her. That's quite a strict condition to have in place. So again, it will depend. If that contract is paying you to be able to reach those standards, that's fine. But you need to know the details. You need to understand what you're signing. And certainly when I had the fallout from Tomlinson's, one of the first things, obviously the first thing we all did as farmers was go to the NFU. The first response back was, you need to send us a copy of your contract so we can have a look at it. And that was checked out. But likewise, we then all had to go through a process of signing a new contract. And I can remember the new contract that we had to sign it very quickly, because if your processor goes bust, technically you still have to supply that processor, or we did in our contract. Technically you still had to supply them even though they no longer existed, and you would be required to continue to do that, which meant basically no one was going to pick up your milk, but you had no right to sell to anyone else. These are little terms that can pop up in those contracts that can really sting you. Now again, we were quite lucky because we had plenty of legal advice and support, and then we had to sign these new contracts really quickly, and I mean really quickly, to the extent that I can remember being gathered in somebody's kitchen with 5 other farmers with our new processor that we're getting ready to supply. And we had, well, they sat there and watched over us while we signed the new contracts. And I think I knew I'd be beaten over the head by James if I didn't do it. But I was the only person who sat there and read that entire contract from cover to cover, which took me a good half an hour. And you could see everybody sitting around me thinking, God, is she just going to get on with it and sign it? But I needed to know what was in that contract before I put my name at the bottom of it. And because I've just been stung, and when you've been and you understand what's going to happen to you, then the last thing you want to do is be signing a contract again and digging yourself into another deep hole. Other little things that have popped up at the moment for me, I'm quite interested in doing a milk vending machine. My faith has gone a little bit in terms of where what you can get out of your milk contract, and I quite like to hedge my bets a bit more and maybe just have a bit of diversity and a bit more satisfaction in how I sell my milk. And the opportunity to do a vending machine off the farm would be great, especially since COVID. We've seen people have really enjoyed that. Does your milk contract allow you to do that? You need to be aware of these things. It might be something you want to develop in the future, and it could help to make your business more robust. But will your contract give you the flexibility to be allowed to do things like that? So, I just think there are so many other things that make up what a contract can do. It can make or break you. It always comes with a health warning, and it should, because I'm a farming business, our processor is a business. We both have to survive. So we both need to understand what we're going into when we start signing these things. And, as someone who has been stung, please just, make sure you keep an eye on the terms that are in there, because they can make a huge difference. And don't just focus on the price, focus on the other bits.
Very good. Thank you, Abby. And Abby, if I could just come back to you, please, just briefly. You mentioned that you'd been stung, as you quite rightly point out. And I think you also mentioned that there was a 6-week arrears payment in place, which I understand is not uncommon in the dairy industry. As an individual, do you feel that there is, it's perhaps a little bit of a loaded question really, but do you feel that delay is leaving your business somewhat fragile. Do you think this is an area we need to look at?
Incredibly vulnerable. I think I was on a call the other day with a new processor who is setting up in Anglesey, so that's in North Wales, and they are discussing weekly milk checks. So you will be paid for your Monday to Sunday milk the following Thursday. And it's very much a little bit like how Michael was saying in Barbers. The owners are also farmers, so they understand certain issues. Very much with this new processing unit, one of the owners at least is also a farmer, and I think he, perhaps coming from North Wales as well, so would have been very much aware of the Tomlinson story. He understood how important it is for farmers to have this constant cash flow coming through, and a bit more security, really, so that you can be a lot more flexible in what you do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Abby. Michael, I'd like to ask you to follow on, please, with that question.
Okay, Ian, thank you. Obviously, the first thing I would suggest is that a farmer needs to milk the contract he's got. We've got a manufacturing contract, so we want farmers and we encourage farmers to produce higher levels of fat and protein. We do have a few that probably might have been better supplying a liquid align pool, perhaps, because if you only produce 3.9 fat and 3.2 protein on a manufacturing contract, the price is going to be pretty ordinary. That said, the bulk of our farmers really do make the most of the contract they've got, which is ideal. And we encourage our farmers to be feeding grass during the summer, very much forage-based. Because it's a manufacturing contract, a very large number of the farmers are engaged in crossbreeding. I've been doing the milk checks today for November, and our average butterfat this month is over 4.6 across our entire milk pool. And the protein, again, is well over 3.5. Now, for those guys on liquid contracts, that would seem quite extraordinary. But those guys then, because they are milking their contract, so to speak, are earning well themselves. So our average price for November is going to be 34p. That's before seasonality, which is over 2p. But it also means we get the efficiencies for transport. So, for example, if Barbers were buying milk from the general milk pool on the spot market, we would have to be buying 1 million litres extra every single month between spot milk and the milk from our own dedicated farmers who are working to our contract and generating the efficiencies themselves, which are passed through the processor, which we then feed back to the farmers. So it's part of that virtuous circle where the guys are really doing what we're after. We don't buy any other milk, but only the milk from our dedicated farmers. Obviously, back to scans, SCCs, and thermodurics too, we have payments for. And the guys do a great job with that, but some obviously have some problems every now and again. As far as the payment terms are concerned, we only pay once a month. But we also guarantee that we will always give at least a month's notice of price change. And should we have a price reduction, on any reduction, we enable a farmer to leave us within 3 months. Now, because of that responsibility, that means that ourselves, when we're talking to our farmers from a barber's perspective on any price reduction, we have to be absolutely sure and convinced that we're doing the right thing for them within the market parameters that we have, and need to explain what's going on to ensure that the farmers also, whilst it'll never be welcome, obviously, but having that 3 months break clause that they can leave us means that there's certainly extra care that's taken. At any other time, the farmers give us just 6 months notice, but we believe that that's part of our responsibility. We have the ability at the moment to pay for the bulk of the milk on a pricing by discretion basis. And with that comes this big responsibility that you can also put prices down as well as up. Hence the reason why we think it's only fair, right and proper that that 3 month ability should be there for the farmers. Interestingly enough, we don't have a volume bonus within our contract either. And that again will seem very unusual compared to most, but all our farms are within 30 miles. So we're quite relaxed if somebody's got 30 or 40 cows and want to start out in the industry. And so far we've welcomed 11 brand new dairy farmers to the dairy industry in the last 4 years. And I've got 4 on the books now, despite all the uncertainties in dairying. We've got 4 new farming families who are looking to convert their beef farms to dairy between now and next summer. So I think that's also really encouraging. It's fantastic to welcome new blood into the industry, and we're really keen to encourage that as much as we can.
Good. Very good. Thank you, Michael. That's spot on. Thank you. So we'll go down to James now, please. If you could answer the question, please, James.
Yeah, I think Michael and Abby have covered it really well. The only thing I would add is that we tend to talk a lot about sharing risk in the dairy supply chain. And, you know, that's probably more important is how that risk is shared than the milk price itself. I mean, markets are markets. We're all liable to the performance of the market. It's performing well at the moment. The issue we tend to have within the dairy sector is how risk is shared. And the example you gave there about payment terms is a good example of how risk is moved down the supply chain to then sit with you, the farmer, that you're effectively giving the next person up in the chain 6 weeks credit. You know, that's 6 weeks free money that potentially is being held there. So it's a really, really big area you need to be careful of when, and like Abby says, the important bit is sit down and read every single bit and understand how that risk is shared and how it could be passed on, because that's a really key part. I think I'll just leave it there. The others have covered it very well.
Good. Thank you, James. James, you'll have to forgive me. We are aware from your introduction that you are looking at adjusting the way dairy contracts are rolled out, and I understand there's been a great deal of work done on this, and we as dairy farmers are very grateful for the work that the NFU have done, and yourself and others, and Michael Oakes. But the 6-week delay that Abby has touched on is not uncommon. And what I'd like to do is try and gauge a feeling from you going forward. Is that an area where you think we are as an industry stuck, or is there some movement on that one going forward, do you think, with the negotiations that you're having to various different parties?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the focus of the whole piece of work is less about, you know, the contract terms and boring legal stuff. It's kind of what Michael said earlier. It's about relationships, and I think that's where we want to see a massive change, really. And things have changed quite a bit. I think we have got better relationships in the dairy supply chain over the years. If you go back even 5-10 years, we were in a worse position than we are now. There's been big strides, and you know, the success of the likes of Arla, First Milk, South Carnarvon in Wales, Omsco, etc., that are cooperatives, farmer-owned cooperatives, is probably testament to farmers working together and seeing some improvements, which is really good. And the DCD, who Michael used to work with, is another really good example of farmers working together. And I think that's the bit we need to solve, alongside all the legal technical bits that we're working on, to make sure farmers have that negotiating power. And the power is really important then to balance that risk that I was talking about. So that example of the 6 weeks payment terms, if we can put farmers in a better position to be able to negotiate a better contract, that's an issue that then suddenly you've got some power to say, right, we only want 1 week or 2 weeks, and then, you know, the other party might say, well, we want 4, and you know, you can actually have a negotiation. Whereas at the moment, this is what you're getting, like it or lump it. And yes, you know, we do need to redress that power as well. But I think, you know, with the new legal framework on contracts, it's gonna set a sort of level playing field, but there's still a huge amount of work for the industry to do alongside it. It kind of sets the rules of the game, but we still need to develop the negotiating power alongside it to make it really work.
Good. Good. Thank you, James. Encouraging words there. And I think when we look at the way the industry is shaping up now in terms of dairy farming, in terms of environmental pressures that are starting to lean on the industry, average age of dairy farmers in the industry, arguably the reduction of dairy farmers that we see across the land might just start to help to be a factor in terms of helping to rebalance the power situation, if there is such a thing. But you're quite right, relationships are so important, really. So we've got another question here, and the question is, where does the panel see the future of milk sales in the UK heading, bearing in mind exports, liquid milk, alternative milks, and quite possibly dairy imports? I'd like to start this one with Michael, please.
I think the future is really bright for UK dairy. I think there are a growing number of processors clearly that are looking to expand their export presence. If you're a processor with an export presence, it gives you so much more variety with regard to spreading the risks that the processor has. If you're just stuck to a single market with the same, with just a single product, just for example, if you're just a liquid milk processor, it is very, very difficult then to be able to extract perhaps the appropriate amount of return that you need to support the processor, but also the farmers within that. It's very well documented the difficulties the liquid sector's had over very many years. I think what's also quite worth looking at is the fact that 10 years ago, nearly every dairy farmer wanted a liquid contract. And to my mind, that is changing. Yes, it's great if you've got a liquid aligned contract, but the non-aligned contracts have been pretty ordinary priced wise and very little scope to do very much to improve the opportunities on your own farm. Whereas with a manufacturing contract, you have so much more scope with the fats and proteins, the different sorts of cows you can then consider to utilize what you can grow on your own farm, perhaps to a better degree. So I'm very encouraged by the growth in exports. Britain's a fantastic place to dairy. We have the most amazing climate. We have really good expertise. So we've got an awful lot going for us. So for farmers out there to find that right processor in your part of the world and working with them, there's a really good future ahead. We've also been very keen to allow our farmers to have vending machines and to market some of their own milk to the public. We've got a number of farmers that now process their own milk into some small amounts of cheese, butter, cream, and plus vending machines. For every farm that's got one of these windows into the retail market, there is nothing like it for the farmers to suddenly acknowledge that customer perception that's so important for dairy. It makes such a difference. So we're really keen to encourage all of that.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for that. James, could you follow that one, please?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with Michael on the export side of things. I think we've been through a pretty rough time in the trade over Brexit and working out what relationship we're going to have with the EU, and we all know all of that. But what we are in now is a situation where we do have some opportunities to export further afield, and actually a lot of people find there's really good value and really good margin in doing that. And Michael and a lot of his colleagues will say that there's often more margin in sending product to the other side of the world than there is to a retailer down the road, and we do have to bear that in mind. But I think my overall vision for the future is that I think we will be in a really positive situation. Global dairy demand is growing. I think there's a growing demand for British dairy products as well. We do a really good job. We need to nail all the carbon footprint stuff, but I think we're making some good progress on that. I think we will be in a good position. I think the dynamics will change, and as Michael mentioned, liquid milk is probably declining, and that's not necessarily something that's almost deliberate. It's sometimes subconscious, but people are drinking less liquid milk. But we're seeing consumption of things like cheese, yogurt, butter, etc. go up. So, what's going down on one hand is also going up on the other hand. I think, therefore, the main considerations for if you're looking for a contract, I mean, number one will be geography, simply what's in your area, unfortunately. And I see there's a question in the Q&A that we might get onto later about, haulage and being far away from factories and things. And that's probably the biggest limitation most people will have. But if you can have a choice of where you're going, it's then finding what fits your farm, what fits your production system. As Michael says, if you're producing a certain type of milk, and then you can milk your contract to get the best returns from that. So that's where I see us going. Okay,
thank you, James. Now, Abby, I'd like you to answer the question too, but if I may, I'd like to pick up on something you said in your introduction, talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, possibly defending our milk against the world of alternative milks and different people's opinions of milk of today. So, Abby, I'd like you to answer the same question, but also can you expand a little bit on maybe just that, alternative milks and potential threat that might be, or not, as you may see it?
Yeah, so certainly in terms of the alternative milks, and please, if you're listening, don't call them milks, because they're not. It's juice, or it's probably not even juice, if I'm honest. It's just watered down something. And I don't know if you've ever tasted it, but it's not great either. And I was very, what would be the word? I'm not going to say lucky, because that's not good. I was in an interview with someone who is a vegan, and we had to do a taste test on an alternative to milk, and it is quite an interesting taste. Look, I think we need to be very aware that the product we're producing is really nutritious, and I mean really nutritious. It's an animal-based protein. It's full of calcium, it's full of iron, it's full of all of these essential micronutrients that if you put them in a diet, in the diet of particularly young people or older people, it is going to give them everything they need. Number two, equally as important, it's affordable, and that is absolutely key. So if we look at these alternative products, they're really expensive. They're not there for, so I live next to the poorest town in Wales, Barry. Some of you might have watched Gavin and Stacey and Barry Island. That's next door to me. And I am very conscious every day when I'm getting the cows in and I can just about make the lights out in Barry. I'm very conscious that there are some incredibly low income households over there. And there are children there who will not have breakfast that morning. And if you can get something into them like milk that will give them everything that they need, then that is probably the most important thing you can do to give them a good start. Likewise, there's a town, I'm going to make Wales sound really bad now, but there's a town also within my county where we have the poorest teeth in the EU. And if you could get cheese into the diet of those youngsters, it could do a whole lot of good. You're not going to get it from these alternatives. So what we're seeing is a market that is extremely good at selling whatever product they've got. And we need to start feeling proud of what we're producing. You know, we really need to start shouting about the value of dairy. It is a good product. It is out there to support a healthy nation. And that's what we're going to need. And we need to start banging the drum about the fact that we are an island, we're a maritime climate. We are so good at growing grass. Grass is our strength. We know that a large proportion of GB or the UK, so we're talking approximately 70% of the land that we've got, in Wales is even higher, is only capable of growing grass. And we are using an animal like a cow to turn that grass into protein that we can feed our population with. And these are the messages we have to keep getting out. We should be really proud of our high welfare standards. We're in the top 3 highest welfare standards in Europe. We need to be shouting about that. Be proud of what you're doing. I know that Red Tractor gets a lot of bad rap for a number of reasons, but equally, it is a brand out there that if we can get behind it, get it sorted, get it giving the messages we want it to give. It's such a good way of being able to tell people you can have faith in our products. So, you know, those are the sorts of messages. I think that we've got a fantastic product to sell. Globally, demand for dairy is increasing. It is. Michael said it, the UK is suited to being able to maximize on that market. I suspect everybody said it. Cheese or products like that are going to be more of the dairy market will be supplying into. Let's not get worried about that. Okay, suddenly I might not be supplying the liquid milk market. Does it matter? We can adapt, we can change, whether that's changing slightly, you know, tweaking a breed or tweaking how you feed or whatever it may be. We can adapt to those things. Like, we shouldn't get hung up on what market we're going to supply into, because, you know, that's not the be all and end all. It's about the product that we're going to create at the end of the day. So, and then just a quick comment on exports, because James and I were in quite an interesting export meal the other day. You know, exports really do offer processing companies a good chance to diversify their income. And I did pick up on Michael's comment about, you know, if you are selling a single product into a single market, then it's going to be very complicated for you to be able to attract good prices. And unfortunately, that's what we're doing as dairy farmers, selling a single product. But if our processors can at least get a little bit of that variety by being able to export, it will help. And we were speaking to Mary Quick, who some of you might have heard of. Mm-hmm. And she was telling us about a deal that she'd had. It was probably quite a few years ago now, but she had approximately £500,000 worth of cheese waiting to go into a supermarket. And she had that ready on a Friday, and on a Monday morning, the order was cancelled. And that was the end of that. And she said it was at that point she realized she was going to drive her business to export and get more diversity, because relying on just one person to be able to pay her bills didn't help her market. So diversity is really good. Export's fantastic. Let's make the most of it.
Good. Thank you, Abby. James, I'm going to switch back to you very quickly, please. Exports are largely driven, and Michael will well know this, as many of our listeners will, by strength of currency. So does the NFU have a view in terms of currency? Are they of the opinion that currency is likely to change direction, or what's the view of the NFU?
Well, I wish I could control it. Unfortunately, yeah, it's one of those. It's a risk factor that we've all seen over the years, and you know, probably the last big dairy crisis, 2015. You know, we all saw there was impact of currency there, and EU trade bans and things, and that's the downside of export, and the downside of trade is there are things way beyond your control. And the one in 2015 was Russian embargo and trade ban because of Ukraine and all sorts, you know, way nothing to do with dairy that can then impact you. And we saw one recently with that I know Michael would have been affected by, with there was a dispute with Airbus and Boeing in the US and Europe, and the US put tariffs on British cheese or European cheese. Nothing to do with cheese, but we got hit, and so, you know, there are things out of our control. But I think the key thing is that diversity of market and spreading risk, not having all your eggs in one basket, and being able to be kind of fleet of foot and move. So, you know, when we can't supply one market, how do we move stuff to the next market? I think processing has got better over the years at moving products from one thing to another. And we're probably seeing right now the spot price of milk is really high. I know there's drying towers and milk powder production that's kind of not being switched on at the moment, because it's all being diverted to try and supply liquid milk, because that's where demand is. And, you know, we're getting better at shifting milk into the highest value. And if they can do that at processing level, and, you know, we all have to be involved in this, then that creates more money in the chain for the rest of us as well.
Good, thank you all. Just following on from that, then, there is another question here that's doing the rounds, and we're going to ask you, James, to go straight on with this one. You talked about diversity and flexibility, and I think I couldn't agree more that that's really essential for any business in pretty much any respect. But The question that has been asked is, could the panel comment on sole supply in terms of contract, because we are here to talk about contracts. For example, should farmers be in the position to be able to have 2 tanks and therefore supply their milk to 2 different processors?
Yeah, so the technical term for that is exclusivity, and you know, an exclusive contract might not use the exact words, but you'll probably see one of the first lines on your dairy contract will say, you must send us every single litre that this farm produces.
Yes.
And that's known as exclusivity. And it does create some problems if you want to do other little things. You know, we mentioned vending machines. Technically, then, you know, you've got to ask permission and things like that. But effectively, it means you can't then spread your risk. And it's very, very rare that people have a non-exclusive contract. There are a few in existence now, and I think probably something we will see more of in the future. You know, if you can say to one processor, right, you need 1 million litres a year from me, I will give you that. That's what you want, and have a contract there. And then another processor wants another 1 million litres or whatever, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to supply both of those. Obviously, that's a big sort of change to where we are now. There may be complications over logistics or haulage, or, you know, things like split bulk tanks, etc. But I do think it's a good way of, again, talking about risk. It's farmers kind of taking control of that a little bit more. At the moment, essentially the same system happens, but the processor controls it. So, you know, if they have got too much milk for what they need, they just sell it to someone else. You know, they're in control of that sort of dynamic. So I do think it's something we'll see a bit more of, and it's something we want to have in the legislation. You know, with most contracts, will take every single litre of milk and pay the same price for all of it, and that's fine, and that should continue. But where a processor says we only want, you know, 1 million litres, they should not be able to fix you into an exclusive contract, because that then locks you at 1 million litres. You cannot move then, and so they should then give you a non-exclusive contract, which means if you want to expand or grow or whatever, then you've got that option to do so.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you, James. And we appreciate the NFU's thoughts on that one. Michael, could you touch on that one a little bit, please? I know you've talked about the Barbers cheese having a very open relationships with the farmers, in terms of they've actively encouraged, well, not necessarily encouraged farmers, but allowed farmers to diversify their farming activities in terms of perhaps processing milk a little bit or cheese on their own farms. So clearly that's something that's sort of crossed your mind a little bit. Are you in a position to comment on this?
Happy to. Say we've been very relaxed about the marketing activities, as we discussed already. I suppose that because we've got this A and B situation within our contract, and we have a non-discretionary B, it's less of an issue for our farmers.
Yeah.
There's also some responsibility too. Let's not mistake. We've got a relatively small number of farmers, but if, say, 10 of our farmers last year, when the whole dairying world was in somewhat disarray last April and May, and some farmers weren't getting paid for their milk, if we'd had 10 of our farmers go out and buy 100 cows each, and then expect the Barbers family then to pay for those extra litres that hadn't been scheduled or hadn't been discussed, would it be fair for either the Barber family to pay for that extra milk from those 10 farms times 100 cows, or the rest of the milk pool then to shoulder the cost of that milk? Would that have been fair? So with contract evolution, there will also become, I suspect, some more responsibilities too. That may not be a popular thing to say, but it's absolutely true. We ask our farmers to supply us a forecast 4 times a year for 12 months. Now, there are no penalties on the accuracy for that forecast, but we do expect them to send us the forecast, and we would hope that the first 3 months of those forecasts are within sort of plus or minus 5 or 6%. And by and large, they are. These guys have really got good at doing this. They do it frequently, and we have this close engagement. And I think they do understand the reason why it's so important. I suppose the negative side of the exclusivity will be whatever the logistics is going to cost. I suspect you're going to have to be a pretty decent sized farmer for a tanker to go out of its way, potentially, to go and pick up some additional volume of milk. We all know what's happened to logistics and the costs engaged with that, particularly this year. You will all know farmers up and down the country who have seen their milk go down the drain because there haven't been enough tanker drivers or tankers to go and collect the milk. So costs to transport milk has become far more of an issue. So that's probably not going to be awfully helpful on the non-exclusivity, but I would say we're reasonably relaxed about it.
Good. Yeah, I can see that from Barbara's point of view. That's very good. Abby, your thoughts on 2 tanks?
No, I think the clear difference we're seeing with Michael is the fact that Barbers have got a really good dialogue with their farmers. And again, it goes back down to this communication and letting people understand. And where you have good dialogue, you have trust.
Yes.
And that is worth a lot on your pence per litre. And I mean a huge amount. In terms of 2 tanks, I think it's a good option for certain farmers. Probably like Michael, I would agree that maybe it's going to be more appealing to larger farmers than smaller ones. And certainly from what I see of most processors, no one seems to have many major issues with a vending machine. So let's put that to one side. When we're talking about 2 tanks, we're talking about a serious split in your milk yield. But I suppose the example I could give is I have a quota for the retailer that I have to supply. If I exceed that quota, then the remainder of my milk will default into a direct supply, a more basic price. Perhaps it would be nice in the future if I found myself exceeding that I might want to put that milk somewhere else. It depends really how keen I am on trying to move milk. Actually, as a farmer here, I'm relatively happy for someone to just come along and pick up that milk and take it. I don't think logistically I could cope on my size farm. But at the same time, it's always nice to have that option. If you are facing a split in your milk price, why shouldn't you have a chance to be able to sell that somewhere else for a better price? Because surely that will make you a better, stronger business in the future. So it's all going to be very much down to choice. How many people would want to go for it, I'm not sure. But I think it's an option that deserves to be there for farmers to negotiate.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Abby. Right, so we've got some more questions here for the panel. So I'm going to read these now as they're coming along. So we've got a question here. What are the panel's thoughts on Muller implementing haulage charges to haul my milk from Scotland to England, considering that all of my milk is processed in Scotland and is indeed sold in Scottish supermarkets? So, right, James, please.
I thought you might ask me. Do I like it? No. Can they do it? Yes. I think, again, this is just a pushing of risk one. And I find it a little bit galling because by the same token, if you're trying to manage your feed supplies at the moment and you've fixed your feed costs forward, you've now got your feed merchants telling you we're charging you extra haulage surcharges as well. So we're paying haulage both ways in the dairy sector, and that does gall a little bit. I think Muller have a particular issue with logistics and milk volumes, etc. that they're trying to solve. Again, this comes back to relationships. I think that could have been managed better to avoid that exact scenario. And the farmers shouldn't be picking up the tab for it. I think there's also a non-Muller specific issue here, which is that processing is getting more and more consolidated, and naturally farmers will become further and further away from processing sites as processors take those smaller sites and amalgamate them into one bigger, more efficient, more productive site. Now it might be better for efficiency of running the whole place, but that there then needs to be a serious discussion about haulage. And what really worries me is that, we already are, the remaining dairy farms in the east of the country are suddenly further and further and further away from processing sites, which pushes their costs up. And then, we lose an area of potential dairy production, which is quite concerning. And there's parts of Scotland, the east of England, parts of Wales where that is happening already. So that's the wider point that worries me about geography, really.
Thank you, James. Now, I think in the interests of time, which is quietly ticking along and we're fast approaching the 1 hour mark, I'm going to move forward a little bit with another question that's come forward. And that question is that recent trade deals have very much hit the headlines. Would the panel be in a position to comment on the likely impacts of these deals to UK farmers? Michael, would you start with that one, please?
At the moment, I'm reasonably relaxed about them because global dairy markets, not just in the UK or the EU, but all markets have risen considerably. So even if you're in the market in New Zealand, the futures prices today and their forward prices are sort of 33, 34, 35p. So the expectation that a huge amount of dairy is going to suddenly make it and cross that huge distance to come to our markets, I think is unlikely. That's not to say that in future things might change. It does gall me to think that we will be allowing imports into this country that UK farmers would not be able to produce, would not legally be allowed to produce to those same standards. So I find that particularly galling and incredibly frustrating. That said, if we want to be able to export to other countries, we do need to be a little bit more open-minded, perhaps, and let some dairy imports in. I know we particularly are focused on North America, Canada, Australia, Canada for much of our cheese exports, and have done particularly well because we're advocating the positives that we can supply. So the great provenance, the authenticity, the great quality, and the great taste. And I think perhaps we should, we've just got to take a deep breath, plunge on, be positive, because we have so many positive things we can talk about, and the taste itself will make, we shall help to make those deals work.
Thank you, Michael. Abby, would you be in a position to comment on the trade deals, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really echo what Michael's just said. As much as we have an opportunity, well, as much as there might be an issue with dairy imports coming into this country, we have that opportunity to be able to export ourselves. I think that we need the government and processors and farmers and any other stakeholders to be aligned so that, if we're thinking, right, we're going to focus on these export markets, we all need to get investment in the right place and make sure that we're set up to be able to maximize on that. We need the contacts in the different countries. We need the processing capacity in this country. And we need the ability to turn these products into whatever product it is that is wanted out there, and just go for it. So, that's really, I always say, let's see it as an opportunity.
Very good. Nice positive thinking. Thank you, Abby. And of course, James, it would be remiss of me not to ask the NFU's thoughts on trade deals.
Yeah, I won't add much more in the interest of time, but I think I'm not worried about the now. I don't think there are any immediate threats, as Michael says, but we don't know what will happen in 10, 15 years' time. We could be under more pressure then. But yeah, I think in the meantime, it makes it all the more important that we do look at exporting more and adding value, so that if we are importing some cheaper things, then at least we've got the spread of risk to counteract that.
Very good. Thank you, James. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be, for those of you who are watching the clock, and as a chairman, it's my job to make sure that we follow the time. Now, I know more questions keep coming in, and I'd like to thank our audience for keeping the questions coming. It's very difficult for us to step out of our remit, else we'll be getting told off, and we don't want that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me doing a quick summary on what's gone on here this evening. So I'd like to, first of all, thank everybody for tuning in and being involved and listening, because it makes all the difference to where we're going. I'd like to think, we as an industry of dairy farmers are trying our best to encourage young people to embark on the industry of dairy farming. I think it's absolutely most exciting industry, always has been, still very much is. And but it is pivotal that we do, as Abby said, read our contracts top to bottom and make sure we take the time and trouble to get them spot on. Doing business with companies like Barbers, I have to say, is very exciting. And I think, as James says, relationships are pivotal to growth of businesses in any direction. And I think relationships are clearly demonstrated here to us all this evening through Barbers and Michael and his team about how that's helped to create, for example, the A and B price, which is so clear and transparent and gives comfort for their farmers. So for me, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance here this evening. Thank Holstein UK. In particular, I would like to wish the young breeders well for the future, and do keep an eye on the type of cow you breed. Try and have an eye on your market just in case. It's all that very, very important, which I personally think it probably is. So thank you all, and goodbye.